Hey guys, Drew Grit Scott, Bulletproof Saws. Been wanting to make this video for a while, and I tend to want to cover so much ground in this video that I'm all over the place with it. So I don't know how to do this besides telling you this is going to be the first part of a couple videos. And I guess the title's going to be, 100 clone saws later. Some of my, opinions or thoughts on it after doing these for a while. A lot of guys are into the clone saws, and they're into the community. They read the posts. They build a saw here and there. I pretty much do it every day. I build saws, if not every day, every week. I'm building saws. I'm working on saws, doing different things. You guys know I do a lot of chainsaw milling, and there's a lot of different guys out there. So this is just my opinion after 100 saws. And I think what's interesting is maybe it's a little bit different than somebody who has 3 or 5 of these saws, or they're on their first couple builds or whatever. Maybe people look at it a little bit differently, and it's a different experience level. I'm not trying to belittle anybody in saying that. You see different things over time. Your first saw, depending on what you got, could have been great or could have been horrible, and that might shade your opinion. But after you do 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 saws, well, now you see trends over time. So I'm just going to talk to you about that. And I'm going to try not to get diverted in this video. I jotted down just a couple of brief notes to try to keep my wandering ass on point. I don't know if it's going to work, because I already feel like I'm talking more than I want to. But anyhow, it's my perspective after 100 plus saws. Different than a guy with 3 saws or 5 saws. And my perspective might be a little bit different, because there's some guys out there who run a saw a couple times a year. They do a cord, 2 cords of wood a year. Their perspective is going to be different than somebody who does countless cords, whether they're selling firewood, professional tree guys. 80% of my saws go to pro tree guys, and their opinions and what they need out of a saw might be different than a guy who picked up a saw to knock down 5 trees, and he may never pick it up again. It may sit in his garage. He could throw it out, he could sell it, whatever. He did his 5 trees that he had to remove. He saved a couple grand from the tree service guys by doing it himself. If he's qualified, a whole nother video on who should have saws and who shouldn't have saws. Not that I'm the law on that, but I see some questionable shit with saws that makes me cringe. So, I think it's a benefit that I have all these tree services buying saws for me, because you had to build the saws to last. That could be a whole nother video of the things that I do to make a reliable saw. That could actually be a professional work saw for somebody, as opposed to a saw that you're only using, you're milling twice a year, or you're doing a cord of wood. I kind of wanted to talk on, people who are new to this. I'm in it every day, so I see every problem people have. I talk to a bunch of guys across the world, really. I want to say across the country, but there's guys in other countries into these saws. I wanted to kind of talk about, why you see, love and hate for farmer tech. Whether you believe in clone saws or not, I could do a whole separate video on the validity or legitimacy of clone saws. That's a whole nother thing. I'm not getting into that, but what you see is reviews where guys are going to tell you, yeah, I ran half a tank of gas through it and it blew up. And then you have other guys, me personally, yeah, I've been milling with that saw for 3 years, and I run a 52-inch bar on it, and I mill every single week, and the saw's still around. How's that? So you're like, wait a minute. People love them, people hate them. Why is that? And I'm going to tell you. The first order of business on that is there's a big difference between the pre-built saws and a custom-made saw. You generally don't. I know of a handful of other really good builders in this country that are building clone saws. They're doing all the work to them, whether they're porting them, cutting squish, cutting base, whatever it is that they're doing, putting in good aftermarket parts, putting in OEM parts. I don't see a lot of guys complaining about the good builders out there. That being said, I think there's a lot of kids in their mom's basements building crappy saws, and they build 2 saws here. They realize it's a little bit, not that the builds are hard, but supporting people if something goes wrong is hard, and takes a stock of parts in case you have to support these guys. And I see people getting into it and then they're out of it a month later. There's no warranty, they're out of it. And maybe that's a good thing to touch on this video, is things to look out for in these saws before you even get into it. Because I realize I'm jumping all over the place. I don't edit these videos. I do the videos, I sit down and I talk about what I think. And I don't go back and edit this and cut this and bring this all together. You get my opinions, and if I make a mistake, bear with me. I'm not editing it, I'm not a big video guy. But anyhow, going back to that, you have a bunch of different guys in this. You got guys with no experience, their first saw that's better than a Poolin Pro, and it's the best thing since sliced bread. Be careful with their advice. Guy who's built 3 or 4 saws and doesn't really, not gonna say he doesn't know what's going on, doesn't have deep experience in them, be careful of his opinion. But getting back to the love-hate thing, I think part of it is because there's a difference between pre-built and built saws. I don't see complaints on built saws. I don't know if I've ever seen a legitimate builder have somebody get online and complain, because here's the thing. The legitimate builders build good saws. And number 2, if there is a problem, and I've had 2 saws that I had problems on out of the last 100 plus saws. I did have 2 saws that I had problems on. Another video. But those problems were taken care of immediately with a lot of apologies, because I'm not trying to give somebody something that doesn't work. But I made 2 mistakes, and I'll tell you about them on another video. But with the pre-builts, one of the problems that I have is common tribal knowledge out there is telling people that the pre-builts, all you have to do is Loctite all the bolts. Yes, you do, but it's half the story on the pre-builts. The other half of the story on the pre-builts is a lot of them have a lot of shaving, swarf, crap in the cases before they're ever built, and they don't wash that out. So now you have all this shavings and crap in the saw itself, and it's going to run through the motor when they do that first start at the factory. And I've sold a few pre-builts before. Stopped selling them. That could be another video. Not that I don't think they have value, and I'll talk about that. But on the last 10, I had 2 with bad cylinders. One was this is the pre-scored cylinder, where a piece of Nicosil came up, scored the cylinder. So in part of my bulletproofing, of course, I'm pulling those blue saws apart, and I pull it apart, see a scored cylinder, replace all that, clean it up, do all the right things. The other cylinder had pinhole air leaks in it that you wouldn't know unless you pressure tested it. And on pre-built saws, as part of my bulletproofing that I was doing with the pre-builts, was pressure testing after I did the pulling the cylinder, doing all the bolts, doing the chain tensioner, that whole laundry list of bulletproofing a saw. So I could talk real quick, not to get too far off, on why cylinders get pre-scored from the factory. And it's not just that swarf that's in the case, because those are magnesium chips, and I think they leave marks, but they don't leave nasty gouges in the cylinders. What I've seen on the rarer way that they get scored is there's still sand in the cylinder from the sand casting, usually in the transverse. Then they plate them with the Nicosil, so now you have Nicosil plated sand that when it's ran for that first time, that Nicosil plated sand breaks right off, runs through the cylinder, and the Nicosil's so hard, Nicosil scratches Nicosil, and it scratches the cylinder. The other way that I see them getting torn up is, again, Nicosil running through the cylinder, but it's more the Nicosil, don't know the technical term for it, but boogers in the ports, whether it's in the transfer ports, in the intake, and the exhaust. There'll be chunks of Nicosil that aren't really attached to the cylinder. They're semi-attached, and they break off and they run through the cylinder, and they'll score up the cylinder. So pre-scored cylinders, some of them may run. They may run pretty decent for a while, and I don't know if more Nicosil flakes off, if the cylinder, when it shits the bed, but hey, I had the saw for 4 months and all of a sudden it blew up. I think a lot of it is the problems with dirty castings, extra Nicosil, sand, whatever, swarf in the motor. I don't know how that works on the bearings. I'm sure it's not the best thing to run through your bearings. But I don't want you guys to get the idea that I'm ragging on pre-built saws, because I think there's a couple of guys that the pre-built saws are good for. And I'll tell you, the first guy is buying a pre-built as the Bic saw, the Bic lighter of saws. And what I mean by the Bic lighter of saws is he's buying it, he's doing that job with the 5 trees he needs to knock down, and then he could throw that saw in the garbage and he came out ahead financially. So he doesn't have to check bolts, check cylinders, run the saw, get what you get out of it, get the job done, and then, it's an under $500 saw, throw it in the garbage or whatever. You save $3,000, so you're happy. The other guy I think that the pre-builts are really good for are guys who are going to pull the whole thing apart and bulletproof them themselves. They're going to verify the cylinder, they're going to verify all the bolts, they're going to fix the chain tensioner, do whatever has to be done to make that a good saw, and put a little bit of time and maybe some aftermarket parts or OEM parts into the saw, and they're going to make that pre-built saw into a good saw. So I'm not ragging on Farmer Tech here or any of the clone saw manufacturers. What I'm telling you is that there's a difference in saws, and you get a pre-built, it's a 50-50 chance if you're going to get a 100% perfect one, or you're going to get one with some problem, whether it's pre-stripped bolt holes, things not torqued, scored cylinders. It's the chance that you take with a pre-built saw. But you're also getting a saw for a third of the price of an OEM saw that actually has power and can be a great saw. So don't think I'm ragging on Farmer Tech saying pre-builts are the Bic lighter of saws. They may or may not be. It kind of depends. The other thing I want to tell you with clone manufacturers, what I do like is that a fellow who has an old, an 036 or an old saw that he's been running for years and the coil fails. I've seen these guys go to the steel dealer and a coil's $120 or $130 for a coil, and they can get an aftermarket one for, $30 and get that saw up and running. It's an old saw, it's been used for years, they don't want to put a ton of money in it, they're not restoring the saw, so they just want to get it running again, and they don't want to spend $130 on it, and they get that old saw running. I think that that's a great thing, and as a side note, not to get off track, out of 100 saws, I don't know that I've had even one coil fail. Not saying they're OEM coils. I'm just saying in 3+ years, 100 saws later, that's not a part that I've had fail. So maybe it's not a bad option with $30 versus $130. Another thing that I want to tell you, let me look at my notes. Well, I went through long-term use. I went through difference of how guys are using the saws. I went through that. The last thing I'm going to talk about, and this could be a whole nother video too, is I do not like builders who are selling saws with steel badging on the saws. My opinion is the clone saws, if built right, can stand on their own, and they're good saws. And if you have to market them as steel saws and lie to people or trick people or deceive people, number one, your integrity is shit. And number two, the saws probably aren't that damn good and you need to do something extra to sell them. So, you buy the saw and you want to dress it up and you want to badge it as an end user, I don't care what you do. Paint the thing pink for all I care. But for a clone saw builder to sell steel badged saws is dirty, and it's a person I personally would never do business with. It's not my cup of tea. I don't know. I hit on some basic points. Pre-builts versus custom builts. The love-hate relationship. I think there was a few more things that I wanted to go over, but I didn't put them in my notes. So I know this is longer than a lot of my videos, and I will do a part 2 or a part 3 or whatever it takes to get through some of these other talks, because I think some people want to know, hey, what have you seen fail over 3 years? What's good to do, what's not, because I see a lot of misinformation on that too. I see guys replacing parts that I find are the most reliable parts in these saws, and then not replacing the parts that you probably should replace in them. And in that, I see a lot of guys who read the forums and they read the discussions and they regurgitate information that they've read, but they've never actually done themselves. Oh, you have to do this. Well, how many saws have you done that on? Oh, none. You just read it and you're repeating what you heard, which may be right or wrong, and it changes. Another good topic for this. All the clone saws are a moving target. In the last 100 saws, I've seen parts change, many for the better, some for the worse, and it kind of depends. And in one batch of saws, you might get a certain carb on those saws. The next batch, you may get a totally different carburetor on it. That's just the way it is, and it may be better or worse. And a guy who's building his first saw, this is where I think a lot of frustration comes in. He might not know that this new carb that they're putting out now, all the stuff he's read, this has been great, this has been great, and then all of a sudden it's a new batch and he got the bad carb and he's chasing tuning issues and he doesn't know why. He might not have a pressure tester to see if he has an air leak, and he's chasing things. Or parts are missing, or there's a bunch of different things that go on, and clone saws are a moving target, and if you're not a guy who's keeping up on it every day and active in the community, you may not have heard that all of a sudden, hey, the rubbers are bad on the intake boots. A lot of them have cracks in them from the factory. Check that before you run the saw. You might not notice it because it'll stay sealed when you run it, and then all of a sudden it's leaking air as you're running it, it's heating it up and it's moving around, and you have a problem and you're trying to diagnose it, and you might not know that as a new builder. Or a new owner of a pre-built saw. You might not know what some of the problems are unless you're up on it every day, and that's the frustration of the moving target that clone saws are. I don't know. I probably talked about enough on this video. If you have questions, concerns, I'm a reasonable guy. Post a comment. I'll respond. Or if it's something that I think I could talk about, I'll make a whole nother video for you guys on different things. If you want to know how to do certain things, I'll show you some of that too. Drop me a note. I don't know. I felt like I talked way too much there. I hope I didn't bore you guys to death. True Grit Scott, Bulletproof Saws. Thanks for watching.